C.
Go.
Surgeon.
Go.
Procedures.
Go.
AFD.
Go.
Network.
Go.
Computer soup.
Go.
Raj, network, give me an Amber. RTC, you on AFD conference.
RTC's on the FD conference.
Okay, all flight controllers, let's play it cool.
Hello, my name is Joseph Howard, and welcome to the Yates Community Forum. My guest this week is Mr. Gene Kranz. Welcome, Mr. Kranz.
Joe.
Mr. Kranz is retired from NASA as Director of Mission Operations, where he worked from 1960 to 1994. He was born in Toledo, Ohio, is married, and has 6 children. He is considered by many to be the unquestioned authority of mission control during the Apollo missions. He wrote the book on mission rules and is quoted as saying he had one of the finest jobs in the spaceflight business. The Apollo program is considered by many to be the greatest adventure in human history. Historians would probably regard the historical landing on the moon as the most significant accomplishment of the 20th century. Between December 1968 and December 1972, 24 men flew to the moon. 12 landed and walked on the lunar surface. 600 million people worldwide watched Neil Armstrong. President Nixon said of Apollo 11, "This is the greatest week in history since creation." Mr. Kranz is famous for playing the Star-Spangled Banner and Sousa marches to get pumped up. He is a devout Catholic, has a reputation for catching every mistake, and seems to never sleep. He has received too many special honors and awards to mention. I'd like to welcome again Mr. Gene Kranz.
Joe, that was a heck of an introduction. Thank you.
Mr. Kranz, of all the honors and awards you've received, which one holds the greatest meaning to you and why?
It really isn't the honors and awards. The one I'd say that I enjoyed the most is a leadership medal because I've worked with young people all of my life. I probably, in the 35 years I've spent in spaceflight, probably have brought 5,000 to 7,000 young people into the business of spaceflight operations. And as far as I'm concerned, the greatest accomplishment I've had was to have the opportunity to lead and teach and work with these young people.
Of all the presidents you've met, which one had the greatest impact on you?
John F. Kennedy. There's no question. He gave us a dream. He gave us the dream back in the start of the Apollo program. He said, we choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon and do other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. And he did this before we had ever put an American in space. We didn't even think it was possible. And he taught us to believe in the impossible, and we went and did it.
Do you think your job, would have been as broad if it wasn't for John F. Kennedy?
I think that we would have had difficulty getting the space program really rolling because the initial challenge before he came along was to just put a man in space. We did not have this dream to go to the moon, and John F. Kennedy gave us this dream. And the great thing about it was that at that time in our country, the Vietnam War was going on, students were rebelling in campuses, nobody wanted to study engineering, math, science, that type of stuff. And once that he had turned you on to this dream, young people started responding to this challenge. It was a great time to live. It was a lot of fun.
Could you briefly describe what your responsibilities were as Director of Mission Operations?
The Director of Mission Operations basically involved the responsibilities for everything it takes to plan, train, and fly a mission. And that includes the design, the development of facilities, all the software that goes into it. So basically, everything from the time the spacecraft lifts off until it comes back to Earth was my responsibility. And as a flight director, I worked on the console there, and the flight director's responsibility is very simple. His job is to take any actions needed for crew safety and mission success. So it's a really neat job.
From 1955 to 1958, you flew F-80s and F-100s for the Air Force in Korea. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
This was when I grew up, when I was even younger than you are. I had, my dream was to learn to fly an airplane. In fact, that was my passion, that was my obsession, as a lot of kids want to be athletes and sports figures, that type of stuff. My job, my interest was in flying, so I would hang around airfields, I'd polish airplanes, I'd fuel them up, I'd build models, and over a period of time, that was the only thing I wanted to do in life. And I went to an aviation college where I learned to design airplanes, actually maintain airplanes. I got my aircraft and power plant license, and I got my pilot's license. From there, I went into the Air Force, and I was able to say, this is the greatest job in the world. You get in an airplane, and you're cruising along at 45,000 feet. I mean, you're just like a bird.
In 1960, you worked for what was then called the Space Task Group in Langley, Virginia. Could you tell us a little bit what is Could you tell us a little bit about what it was like in the early days of American spaceflight?
We started off at Langley Field, and we had there were probably about 400 people there overall. We had a very tough leader, guy by the name of Walt Williams, and he was Chuck Yeager's boss. He was the guy that in 1947 took America into the age of supersonic flight with a rocket ship, the Bell X-1. He formed this team at Langley, Virginia, and we had people from Flight Test, we had the original astronauts, and we had some engineers. And when we started off in 1959, 1960, we didn't know anything about space flight. There weren't any computers. We didn't have any computers. We had no worldwide communications. We couldn't get people out of college with any experience in rocketry. So we'd just go out and say, okay, let's launch a rocket today. And we'd launch it and it'd blow up. In fact, we blew up 2 out of our first 3 rockets we ever launched. But in the process, we started to learn the kinds of things we needed to be successful. And most of all, we had to learn to believe in ourselves. And once we started believing in ourselves and believing that we could do it, then we started to become successful in the business of spaceflight.
Did you see the movie The Right Stuff?
Yes, it did.
Do you think it was an accurate portrayal of the Mercury program?
I think it was a good portrayal of several of the astronauts. There were a few of the things in The Right Stuff I didn't particularly like. The boss of the Mercury program was Walt Williams, and he was not portrayed realistically in The Right Stuff. Walt Williams was a tough, honest man who stuck his neck out, took the risks to get into this business of spaceflight. Another man who was, I think, very great in getting the space program going and other programs within our country was Lyndon Johnson, and I think he was portrayed very poorly. But I think the picture of the astronauts was, in many ways, on track.
You mentioned Chuck Yeager. Did you know him personally?
Oh, yes. I flew with Chuck Yeager, or against Chuck Yeager in gunnery competition out in Nevada. We were flying same type airplanes. I scored his targets. He scored my targets. I've met him several times at air shows because I work a Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress right now. I'm a flight engineer on it and do air shows throughout the country. And we run across Yeager at various air shows.
Do you think he should have been selected as an astronaut?
I don't think he was interested in being selected as an astronaut. He had set his own standard of performance. He had picked the own direction that he wanted to go, and I think he wanted to stay in the aircraft flight test. And I can understand that because the aircraft flight test could do something almost every day where the astronauts we had would have to train for years so they could have only one flight. So it was a choice I think he made to stay in the aircraft programs.
Did you ever want to be an astronaut yourself?
I did in the early days. I came into the Mercury program, and I thought, gee whiz, after a year or so, a couple of years, I'd figure out the ropes and figure out how to get in, but they still had the requirement to have a test pilot background, and I did not have that kind of a background. At the end of about 2 years, though, I found that I could basically work every mission in spaceflight. I could fly everything that came along, so I really enjoyed what I did, loved it, and then just made the choice that says, I just want to be the flight director, I want to be the director of operations.
In the movie The Right Stuff, Gordo Cooper always asks, so who's the best pilot you ever saw? Mr. Kranz, who's the best pilot you ever saw?
Oh, boy, that's a tough one. I'd name a couple of them. I think of the most recent ones, I think Dan Brandenstein. He's the one that flew that spacecraft up where they actually, the crew in the payload bay, 3 crewmen, grabbed a hold of that satellite in their bare hands. And I think Dan probably was one of the finest pilots I've ever seen. I think Joe Engel was a good stick and rudder man. I think Neil Armstrong was incredibly cool. That's a tough one. We have to discuss that more. I'd have to think about that more, but good question.
Could you tell us how you got your nickname General Savage? And does it have anything to do with the television series 12 O'Clock High?
Yes, it does. How'd you figure that one out? That was back in the early 60s. We set a standard of performance for myself. So I had the responsibility for all of these young controllers, and they would come in fresh out of college, and they had a real strong, good work ethic. We had taught them to believe in themselves, but then what we had to do is to teach them to be perfect. Because the business of spaceflight, if you make a mistake, it generally kills somebody or it blows up a rocket. And I just became very intolerant of anybody who didn't do absolutely the best work that they could do. And one day I came into work, and right in the door was a great big gold star, single star up there, and it had General Savage written across this thing. And the guys used to like to play practical jokes on me. And this is one that I left that door up for a long time with General Savage on it. It was a lot of fun.
Could you tell us a little bit, Dr. Werner von Braun, the man who invented the Saturn V booster?
Yeah. He had, the first time I met von Braun was actually as a college student. I was at Parks College, and he came for a lecture. And they needed a volunteer to change his slides for him. So I changed von Braun's slides. I think von Braun also had a dream, just like John F. Kennedy. Von Braun, I think, was one of the original rocket pioneers that came over after the World War II from Germany, and he believed that he could build a rocket large enough to go to the moon, and he never lost sight of that dream. And he was a marvelous engineer for inspiring people, and again making them believe. Our problem, so many problems we have in life, is we really don't believe strongly enough that we can do it. Well, he convinced his people that they could do it. And that was neat about some of the leaders that we had back in the early 60s, because I didn't believe we could go to the moon. I mean, it's literally, we had difficulty getting our first rocket off, and John F. Kennedy said, "We're going to the moon." And we thought, that guy, he doesn't know how tough it is. But then all of a sudden you start thinking about this thing, gee, and you say, what a neat job. And then pretty soon you start making a little bit of progress, and you start believing that you can do it. And then as this belief builds in all of these people, it is incredibly, I mean, it's just incredible how you get this great feeling that as a team you're going to get the job done. And von Braun had that, Kennedy did that, and Dr. George Miller, who was our top boss in headquarters in spaceflight, believed it.
Some believe that if Gunter Wendt had been in charge, the Apollo 1 fire never would have occurred. Do you agree, and did you know Apollo 1 astronauts Virgil Grissom, Roger Chaffee, and Edward White? And how did that tragedy affect you and the space program?
Very good question. No, I think Gunter Wendt was, I don't think there was anything that could have prevented the Apollo 1 fire. There are certain events that changed the course of history. And I was working in mission control just hours before the fire occurred. And I was going down the freeway taking my wife out to dinner when we heard the fire had occurred, and I drove over to mission control. And it was just an incredibly difficult time for everybody there. How it changed the course after, as I said, I was the division chief for mission operations at that time. I got mad. I got mad at myself. I got mad at my controllers. I got mad at all of the people who had the opportunity that day to stop the countdown and say, this is not going well. This isn't good enough. And you see this emblem we have right here. There's 4 stars on it. The 4 stars stand for discipline, morale, tough, and competent. Well, the tough and competent stars came from the Apollo 1 fire, because we said from now on, we will be accountable. We will stand up to our responsibilities. We will never again let anything like this happen. So that's where the toughness came from. The competence came from we will never stop learning, because we had stopped learning about working in a pure oxygen environment in that spacecraft. And we took this spacecraft, closed it up, put pure oxygen in there, and if you've ever worked with oxygen, you'd light a match with oxygen, it literally explodes. And that's what happened inside the spacecraft. So I think that Apollo 1 fire really resulted in the mental toughness to be successful for the remainder of the program.
Mr. Kranz, Apollo lunar descent involves navigational calculations based on complex radar data. Could you explain that?
Going to the surface of the moon, we establish what we call a footprint, our landing target. It's 5 miles long, and the center of the footprint is where we try to land, and I'm going to use Apollo 11 as an example. Now, our computers in those days were very dumb computers compared to the stuff we have now. we're going around the moon, and we pick a point that's roughly about 250 miles from our landing site, and we fire the rocket engines, and it slows us down, and then the moon's gravity starts pulling us down towards the surface until when we're about 3 miles from this target, we're essentially vertical, and we're about 700 feet above the surface. Well, you mentioned the ability to navigate. We used a series of gyroscopes on board the spacecraft, and we had this very primitive computer. And from the ground, we would tell it when it was 250 miles away from its landing target, and we would tell it where its target was. And it would use the mathematical processes in the computer to set up its trajectory so it would actually throttle the engines to the point where it would come right down at the point we wanted.
During the Apollo 11 moon landing, a series of 1201 alarms kept on going off, which nearly caused Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin to abort.
Yeah.
Could you explain the significance of these alarms?
Yeah, we had the computers we had would sort of watch how well they were doing the business, and if they ever got behind in their work, they would send us alarm. The 1201 alarm, the computer was telling us, it says, I got so many things to do and I just don't have enough time to do them, so I'm going to do only the high priority alarms. Well, on the ground, what we started to do then was to make sure that those things that it was doing in priority were still being done well enough to continue the landing. And it was. This other alarm that occurred, this 1202 you mentioned, if it happens 3 times, the computer shuts down and waits for instructions. Well, if it shut down when we were coming down to the surface of the moon, we would have no choice but to abort. So that is what we call the PODO alarm, do program 00, which goes to halt and then just waits for instructions. The bad part about this is as a result of that and a navigational problem that we had, we just about ran out of gas, fuel, when we were landing on the moon. When we finally shut down the engines, we only had 17 seconds of landing fuel remaining. So we were very close to calling it all off that day.
During the Apollo 11 mission, while Neil and Buzz were landing on the moon, you left behind a soaking wet imprint on your hand on the flight plan. Could you elaborate on the emotion of playing such a key role in such a historical event?
It's, as flight director, my job, I basically had the responsibility for the team. I had the responsibility for the go-no-goes as we were going down the line. It's sort of like quarterback or any leader in any sports team. You're the one who has to be steady. You're the one who has to be cool. You're the one who has to be calm. And I could always give the outward appearance of being steady, cool, calm. But boy, the sweat on the inside of my palms was something that if I'd put it down in something, you could see the handprint right there. So it was the kind of thing I had to keep my voice level up so it always sounded like I was in charge, that I wasn't worried. And this is part of the business of learning the business of controlling a team, just like you have right here when you're operating in the studio. You got to be in charge.
Did you see the movie Apollo 13?
Yes, I did.
What did you think about the movie?
I think Ron Howard did a great job in maintaining the technical content of the movie. Technically, the movie was right on track. He did a great job in showing young people. In fact, the thing that pleased me most about the movie was it showed real young people who were heroes. I mean, real people, not fictitious people, but they took charge and made the decisions and fixed the things that needed to be fixed and just figured out how we were going to get this crew back home. I think he did a great job in that. In fact, we had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with Ron Howard and Tom Hanks and all the actors as they were getting ready to, well, actually during the time they were writing the scripts, when we'd have them over in Mission Control and we'd tell them how the control team operates, how we get trained, that type of stuff.
Did you enjoy it from an entertainment perspective?
Oh, yeah. In fact, it was funny. We went to a premiere. And the first time you ever see, if you just imagine yourself looking at yourself up on a screen and somebody's playing you, and all of a sudden you're embarrassed, you're self-conscious, you say, I didn't say that, or I didn't do that, and it didn't really happen that way. But after about 15 minutes, you forget the self-consciousness, embarrassment, and all of a sudden, you're just right in the middle of that movie, and you're praying that they're going to bring this crew back home, and all of a sudden, when they finally get this crew back home and Ed Harris sits down and gets sort of misty, I started crying. So Ron Howard did a great job in pulling that package together.
Do you think Ed Harris portrayed you really accurately?
I think he did a fine job. I think he's well coached. He had two of my controllers working for him as technical consultants. And you mentioned that palm print, leaving the wet palm print. The other thing I did when I was nervous, I had these ballpoint pens, and I'd click the top until the point where the pen would just about break. Well, I'd go through pens in the course of a mission, a couple dozen of them. Well, Ed Harris is there clicking the ballpoint pen just as he's getting ready to launch. So my controllers coached him pretty well.
Were you surprised to learn that the entire world would become so engrossed with the Apollo mission after the explosion?
I was surprised how rapidly it occurred. I don't think there was any question that we were still at a point where space travel was very new. We had just finished landing on the moon, and the world had a lot of interest in that. As soon as the problem occurred, it seemed, however, everybody started to come to our help. The thing that was most surprising to me was the Russians. We were right at the top of the Cold War. We were virtual enemies at this period of time. They knew we were in trouble. And they were listening to our communications. They knew that one of the maneuvers was going to put us down in the Indian Ocean, and the United States didn't have any ships there. So they came and offered assistance. In fact, virtually the entire merchant ships in the entire world came and offered us help because they knew we had to land in an ocean. So it was really a team effort to get that crew back home.
During the Apollo 13 mission, there was a point where you made the decision to turn off nearly all the systems in the LEM. Did you have a fear that the batteries and the propellant would freeze?
Yeah, there were a lot of times when we were playing it real close there. And there wasn't anything about that mission that was easy. In the spacecraft, on the sun side, like in that light bulb side, the temperature is about plus 150 degrees. On the other side of the spacecraft, on the dark side, it is minus 180. So from one side of the spacecraft to the other, there's 330 degrees temperature difference. And there's no doubt that the batteries would freeze up, the propellants would freeze up the water. So what we do is we do sort of a roll maneuver like a barbecue to let the sun heat all the sides of the spacecraft. And it was very tough to set up. We had never done this before with the lunar module thrusters. And we had a lot of trouble doing it, but we finally got one set up which sort of kept the temperatures at an acceptable level. They got down into like the very low 40s inside the spacecraft.
Could you describe how you felt during re-entry blackout during Apollo 13, re-entry radio blackout during Apollo 13, and could you describe the emotion you felt once you realized the astronauts had returned safely?
Yeah, in the blackout period, this is where when the spacecraft comes in and the air around the spacecraft starts to get superheated, it gets up to a couple thousand degrees, and it forms what they call plasma. And from the ground, you cannot communicate up through this plasma. We've always been able to compute the time when blackout starts and when it should end to within a second. When you get in this blackout period, there's nothing you can do about the crew. You can't give them any more help. You can't communicate. I always just sort of say a prayer for the crew. And you're all left with your own thoughts as to did you do everything you could have to get this crew back home. And when blackout should have ended, and you watch this clock start counting up now to plus 1 minute, and you still haven't talked to the crew. Every demon you ever had in your life starts bubbling up to the surface in there, and you start having for the first time doubts that maybe they didn't get through it. Maybe there's something that you had missed. And it really gets scary at that time. And then by the time you get to 2 minutes and you haven't heard from them, I mean, it is absolute deathly silent in that room. Then we heard from a downrange station that was it. And as soon as we saw that spacecraft and the parachutes, virtually everybody in mission control started crying. I mean, it was just the relief of all of this tension, all of the anxiety, all of the fatigue. It was a spectacular time.
Under such extraordinarily difficult and potentially life-threatening circumstances for the crew of Apollo 13, how did you maintain such professional composure and exhibit so much character?
I think it was the process of training that we used. We had a training program that was so intense that it was almost a relief to get into the mission time frame. We were taught to make decisions in seconds. We had incredible confidence in ourselves and our team. We knew that if we made a mistake, we could dig it out and find some other path. So it was really a question. I think it's principally confidence in yourself was key.
I'm not trying to be negative, but their work was what? Say you respond to all those.
Sort of lost track of our responsibilities internally and our using our head. From a standpoint of the urban problems we had, I spent some time with Ralph Abernathy immediately preceding the Apollo 11 mission and had the opportunity to listen and talk to him. And it was interesting. He was out there for launch, and he said that for some period of time he felt that this was one of the most uplifting things that he had seen. I think that if I'd go back and take a look at what this country needed then and what this country needs now, the first thing is it needs to believe in itself. It needs to believe it can solve its problems. And for a short period of time, our country learned to do difficult things and things that they thought were impossible. I think it provided inspiration to our kids because our kids were rioting in the campuses at that time. It was very difficult to find enough people who had studied the engineering, the math, sciences to fill the numbers of engineers and controllers we needed. And kids went back into school again. We made incredible discoveries in the area of medicine during this period of time. And in fact, if you take a look at much of the technology that we use today in hospitals, actually traces itself back to the 60s and 70s. The computer revolution started off, the communications revolution. And the long and short, I think, for most of the people, this development of technology provided employment. It kept the economic engine of the country going, and therefore we could take better care of the people. So I think it's sort of a circular argument. You have to invest to take care of your people. And space, I think, represented a good investment.
Now that you've retired from NASA, what activities are you involved in? What do you do for fun?
Do several things. The principal activity that I entered in when I left NASA, I'm building an aerobatic biplane. I'm building an airplane, and it's just about complete. I hope to have it through this year, and I just want to fly. It's an open cockpit, almost a vintage airplane like the ones that you saw back in the 30s. I participate in air shows as a member of a crew in a World War II bomber that's over 50 years old. I thoroughly enjoy that. I do spend a lot of time motivational speaking to kids. I bet I've talked to 10,000 kids in just the past year. Do various rallies. I did one up in Hutchinson, Kansas, where they had about 4,500 to 5,000 kids there. Did one up in Toledo in January. So I enjoy working with kids. I'm tied in the Hugh O'Brien Youth Foundation. That's a leadership program for high school students. And I've got their Houston meeting that I'm going to be talking to next month. And then I do various lecturing and talking in spaceflight. So basically, I've stayed very busy.
Well, thank you, Mr. Kranz, for being a part of the Yates Community Forum. I've been your host, Mr. Joseph Howard, and in the words of Apollo 17 Commander Gene Kranz, let's take this mother out of here.
Throughout this entire next several days, there was one dominant thought in the minds of all of the flight controllers. We teach them that between God, country, and your own capability, that you can solve any problem that may occur in flight. Throughout the entire course of Apollo 13, there was never any doubt that we'd get the crew back. So there was a very positive approach, and with this kind of approach, you can solve just about any problem that comes up.